Let's go to Israel first. We've had an apology from Benjamin Netanyahu to hostage families. He's held a press conference there. And also in the US, we've had stronger words from Joe Biden. So what are you making about what's being said and what is happening in Israel in the wake of these hostage deaths?
Well, Gemma, the words from Joe Biden are the same as he's been saying for months, so I think they're meaningless. They have been meaningless. He has said months ago Israel's bombing of Gaza was indiscriminate, and indiscriminate bombing of a densely populated civilian area would fit under, for many people, the definition of a war crime. He's kept saying that and virtually done nothing. The British government, in contrast, appears to be actually taking some concrete action. It'll be interesting to see whether Australia follows. But what's happening in Israel is there's massive sort of protests in the streets, backlash against Benjamin Netanyahu. He's saying now he's begging for forgiveness for not prioritising, the hostages sooner. And there's been a lot of criticism growing for several months of him that the hostages were not the priority, that the war was the priority, when many there, not just the families, but many felt he should have. And now he's coming under increasing attack politically. Yair Lapid, who's a leader of the opposition, a significant player in Israel, has talked about Netanyahu and the cabinet of death. He's got his own defence minister now critical. He's got the head of Shin Bet saying he's allowing Jewish terrorism, is the phrase that the head of Shin Bet has used in terms of the West Bank. So a lot of people, and yet the only reason he's still in power is those two men we've talked about before, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich on the far right in his cabinet are keeping him in power, and he'll do anything to keep them on side. They make the difference between staying in power and not staying in power. And it's interesting, Ami Ayalon, the former head of Shin Bet in Israel, told me a few months ago for Four Corners that those two men are, by his definition, terrorists. So if you extrapolate that, it means, according to the former head of security of Israel, two terrorists, ministers, are keeping Benjamin Netanyahu in power. I mean, that is an incredible situation.
Now, the UK has suspended some arms exports to Israel over these humanitarian law concerns. Tell us about these concerns and how big a move this is from a key ally.
Well, Israel is losing a lot of its allies. Countries such as even the US, the UK, Australia, the EU have put sanctions now on some of the settlers in the West Bank because the settlers in the West Bank are now out of control. 620 or so Palestinians in the West Bank, which is not obviously Gaza. That's where the moderates have been in power. The Israeli army and Jewish settlers have killed 620 people between them. No accountability. And I think countries like the UK are saying enough is enough. I don't think Australia will say that. I don't think Anthony Albanese wants to criticise Israel at all. But almost everybody else, including the US and including the UK, is criticising Israel.
Does that go to that ICJ ruling that Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories is in breach of international law?
Well, under international law, generally accepted around the world, it's illegal for an occupying power to transfer its people into occupied territory. There are 600,000 at least Jewish settlers who've been supported or transferred into the West Bank. That transferring them there is in breach of international law. The reason for that is that if you are occupying a place as an army, then presumably it's dangerous, or else you don't need to occupy it. Therefore, you shouldn't be putting your own civilians in harm's way. That's the reason that international ruling was accepted by the world after World War II. And clearly, Israel appears to be in breach of that.
And John, you say you don't expect a change from Australia on this. Do we have obligations too?
Well, Australia can see what's going on, like everybody else can. It's interesting to see the leadership from the Foreign Secretary of the UK missing in action. Appears to be the Australian Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, really saying nothing of any consequence at all on this. And I think the question for Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese is why, in the face of all of this evidence, are you basically saying no criticism of Israel?
Now, as to any end in sight for this war, the sticking point for negotiations appears to be this Philadelphia corridor, at least one of the sticking points. What is it? Why is it important?
The Philadelphia corridor is a buffer zone. It's about 100 metres wide, 14 kilometres long, and it separates the Gaza Strip from Egypt. 1979, Egypt and Israel came to a security agreement under which Israel would no longer have combat troops there. You can see on the vision there where Benjamin Netanyahu is pointing with that stick down the south end there. That's the Philadelphia corridor. Now, the Israelis, Benjamin Netanyahu, are saying we must leave a significant military presence there. Egypt doesn't want that. The US doesn't want that. The Palestinians don't want that. Nobody wants that. The Palestinians are saying that Benjamin Netanyahu is throwing this in, knowing that no one's going to accept it, purely to sabotage any ceasefire talks because he wants the war to continue. He would argue, of course, that given that Israel hasn't yet completely dismantled the Hamas military machine, the head of Hamas is still on the loose in Gaza. So he would argue that until that happens, then the war's not over.